Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required. Subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspectives, this is Revenge of the Birds. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Jess Root from Revenge of the Birds Radio, and this is your pre-game preview podcast as the Arizona Cardinals are set to play the St. Louis Rams at University of Phoenix Stadium this Sunday afternoon. As always, this episode is brought to you by Audible.com, the internet's greatest and best source for audio content. Check it out. For Revenge of the Birds listeners, we have a special deal for you where you can go to audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds, audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds, and you can test out the service for a month for free and even download yourself a free audiobook of your choice there on the site. As a guest for today, as we want to do each week, is to preview the opposing team the Cardinals will face and bring on somebody from ideally one of the SB Nation, one of the sites from the SB Nation family. And today we have the pleasure of having 3K from Turf Show Times join us on Revenge of the Birds Radio. How are you doing today, 3K?
Jess, I'm doing great. I just want to say Audible.com is the best platform for all your Audible.com needs. Nobody better. Absolutely nobody better.
Hey, listen, everyone. You just got a plug from me, and you got a plug from the guy who's coming on the show, so you know it has to be good.
As one of the greatest philosophers in the history of time, Pitbull said, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. The biggity boy is a diggity dog, all right? I'm just going to leave it at that.
And Dale, of course.
Dale. Well put, man. See, I knew you were ready. I knew you were ready for this, Jeff.
So, tell us, what is the state of the St. Louis Rams right now? Obviously, they're coming off a very good, a very impressive, I don't know if you call it impressive, but a win over the San Francisco 49ers, giving them two NFC West divisional victories. To give us the state of the Rams right now.
Yeah, I think that's and a great segue from Dale into the Rams. By the way, I wouldn't at all call it impressive. I would just note the inconsistency. I think that's one thing that I've been latching on to as an easy way to describe the Rams since week 3 when they lost to Dallas after putting up a 21-0 lead on them and being able to find a way to lose that game. It's just a weird team, and the fact that they've got 2 NFC wins. Got blown out by Minnesota and Kansas City, came out of a bye week with big losses at Philadelphia and versus San Francisco at home on Monday night, who they were able to go to, Northern California and get a win. It's just a weird team, man. It's a weird team that finds new ways to change everything that we thought we had learned about them up to that point. And it makes it tough, going into Sunday to have any real analysis that I can feel confident providing, Cardinals fans to say this is who the Rams are. It changes so much week to week that it's difficult to really get a feel for who these guys are. I think part of it is, for the third year in a row, they're the youngest team in the league. And I think that contributes to some inconsistency in the fact that they're going through the motions as they learn. If there's a growing process for young players who are growing into themselves as NFL caliber players, but also the fact that they don't have a ton of veteran leadership that is able to keep the boat from rocking as they get into week-to-week contests, whether it's on the road, at home, different caliber contests, whatever it is. That they're just not able to find any kind of consistent performance, which seems kind of the opposite of you guys.
So there's one trend I've noticed. Now, I haven't followed them religiously by any means, but I paid attention to them.
I don't think Rams fans follow the Rams religiously. I don't think I can dock you for that.
It's funny story. I was asked to be a guest on. It was a different Rams. I think it was Rams Addiction. Is the podcast if you're familiar with them. And I was on their preseason as they were doing kind of the preseason preview for the different teams. And it was really quite interesting as they talked about this is the year for Sam Bradford. This was before I even came on, and so I was listening to the show and just they blew a foghorn every time that Sean Hill was mentioned. And then to see Sam Bradford go down yet again, tragically, I had to chuckle to myself after being on that show and just the I guess the trepidation of the thought of Sean Hill being the quarterback. And then he ended up being the quarterback and getting hurt, and you move on to Austin Davis. Back to what I was going to say. What I've noticed about the Rams most of the first half of the season, they start out really good during the game. So their offense moves the ball early, gets points, and then disappears.
Yep. Yeah, it's been interesting to see how successful, especially this year, when everything else really struggled out of the gate in the 3-game stretch before the bye week, how good the Rams are at implementing the scripted game plan. They've been incredibly successful at just about every single game they've played at building an early lead. They're one of the best teams in the league. They were one of the best team in the league at scoring on the opening drive. I don't know if that's the case given the last 2 weeks, but they've got a good scripted game plan. They know who the guys to go to were. Now, that's changed a bit now that they've lost Brian Quick for the season, third-year wide receiver who's really developing as a credible threat. And having lost him, I think the impact that's been felt is pretty significant, especially in the passing game. Whether or not that accounts for Austin Davis' struggles, I don't know. But it certainly contributed to him. But, yeah, they've been very successful coming out of the gate, building early leads. The one real outlier was the Philadelphia game coming out of the bye week, where they went down big early and were able to come down from a huge deficit and almost win the game. So it's one of these teams that whether they build a lead early and find a way to lose it, or they get down big and are able to come back in the game, they're just inconsistent enough but talented enough to make the games entertaining. What's been interesting is that, they started 1-4, only able to win that road game in week 2 against Tampa Bay. Everything else just didn't work out. And then they come back and they're 2-1 the last 3 weeks. Road win against San Francisco, home win against Seattle, and really got crushed. Everything just fell apart against Kansas City on the road. But you're seeing the kind of signs of improvement, especially among different units. The pass rush has certainly improved by leaps and bounds. The offensive line, once they made a, let's say, semi-permanent change away from David Joseph, who was playing guard pretty pathetically, and permanently installed, again, semi-permanent, how do you say that? Semi-permanently, Dale, put in Gregg Robinson, the number 2 overall pick, and inserted him into the offensive line. I mean, talent speaks more than experience a lot of times, and I think that was the case. They've got a lot of things rolling on the offensive line. It's just a matter of figuring out with the youngest team in the league again where those things fit. And an offense that just doesn't have the components. You mentioned Sam Bradford, he's gone. Now Jake Long, left tackle, is gone for the year. Brian Quick, who was turning into the number 1 overall wide receiver, he's gone for the year. So they're kind of having to adjust on the fly. I think for Rams fans, the big thing is, head coach Jeff Fisher and the general manager Les Snead have had 3 years and more picks than almost anybody in the modern era, probably since Herschel Walker, to be able to account for that. This is the offense they've built. So if they don't have weapons, if they don't have an adjustment built into the system, there's nobody to point to at this point. They've had enough time, and they've had the draft capital to be able to prepare for that. So, yeah, it's been an interesting way to get to this point at 3-5, and the fact that they're able to be so successful in the early drive suggests that they've got the talent. They understand what's successful for this team. It's just a matter of being able to make adjustments within games and get a sense of the tempo and figure out where the holes are with the opponent, and I think that's really where they struggle.
Let's turn back the clock a bit, and this is Revenge of the Birds Radio talking with 3K from Turf Show Times, the St. Louis Rams blog from SB Nation. We're talking about the St. Louis Rams as the Cardinals face St. Louis this weekend, University of Phoenix Stadium. Let's turn back the clock, talk about the offseason. What was kind of the leading into coming into the season, some of the key changes, key additions, key losses as the Rams entered the 2014 season?
Yeah, I think it was weird. The Rams made it at least publicly apparent. There was a lot of people who questioned the sincerity of the commitment to Sam Bradford as quarterback because it hadn't really paid dividends at this point, as opposed to, let's say, 6 years prior. The Rams didn't have big holes the way they did. 6 years ago, this roster was just absolutely depleted. Then we went through, the 5 worst years of any NFL team in the history of the league. But they, with the RG3 trade and some of the moves they had made in free agency, they built this roster to be in better position than it had been probably in a decade, especially with the youth. The potential's there. And so once they committed to Sam Bradford, it allowed them to go out and pursue, relatively being the case, a best player available strategy in the draft, something they haven't been able to do for quite some time. You look at the roster 2 years ago, you had to fill wide receiver, and they did that in successive years. Guys like Brian Quake, Chris Givens, Tavon Austin, Stedman Bailey, they invested heavily in. You look at the defensive secondary, they brought in guys like Janoris Jenkins, Trumaine Johnson, Rodney McLeod in the back for safety, along with T.J. McDonald, and then obviously adding LaMarcus Joyner this year. They've had big holes that they've had to fill, but because they had so much draft capital, they could almost overdraft in those positions. And I think this was the first year where they didn't have to do that. And so you saw some interesting moves. Greg Robinson, number 2 overall in the offensive line, when he didn't really have a hole to fill. You couldn't really place him at left tackle immediately because you had Jake Long there. You had guards in place with Roger Saffold and a free agent that they thought was going to give him more than they ultimately did in David Joseph. You bring in Aaron Donald to a defensive line, and I think you mentioned it. I know I saw your question. I haven't gotten through them, but everybody knows the Rams' defensive line leading out of 2013 was one of the best lines in the entire league. So the idea that you would draft a defensive tackle in the first round really suggested that they were comfortable with the roster where it was. They just felt that they could go out and draft some guys that they thought would add some potential and have some growth. It's been interesting to see how it works because, strangely enough, the holes that they didn't have at the end of the 2013 season ended up developing into some issues that it looks like we're going to have to deal with after this season ends. But it's been an interesting ride, man. And I think, if anything, it's another year where you've got all this young potential, but it's not really developing in year 2, year 3, year 4 the way you want. It's just really strong rookies, and they're not developing into kind of the long-term players that you hope they would be after strong rookie showing.
Well, one thing that's been talked about a little bit here locally on some of the local radio talking about the Rams, as we do a little bit of talk with the NFC West, is the way they drafted is they got more talent, so they've got they kind of set it up for this year where if Sam Bradford succeeded, they could say, okay, you can finally go with him. But if he didn't succeed, you've got the foundation around them in skill players and the offensive line and the strong defense that you can go draft another quarterback or even bring in a journeyman kind of to take the place and be in a position to compete. Unfortunately, Bradford had the injury. Now, what do you think the prognosis is moving forward? Do you see them moving on for Bradford, drafting a guy, or what do you think is the future of Sam Bradford for next year?
Well, I think it's tough. You mentioned the fact that they put so much effort into surrounding him with enough talent everywhere else, and the fact that they were so committed to him in last offseason when everybody thought that was the year that there was a more opportune moment to really draft a credible backup, somebody throughout the draft that offered some potential if Bradford didn't really succeed in 2014. Now, I think Rams fans were really lucky that they got a guy in Austin Davis who was able to carry them through a couple early games. And unlike the last 2 games, was very cognizant of his limitations, managed the game well, allowed the rest of the team to make plays, and was waiting on the defense to carry him through games, and that just didn't happen, much to a lot of people's surprise, including people like yourself, who I'm sure saw 2013 and said, look, the Rams' defense isn't the issue. I think if we're looking at Sam Bradford in the Rams' future, it's hard to see why they would be so committed to him, 6 months ago, and then move on now when the situation is arguably better than it was 6 months ago. If you're saying that they should have stuck by Sam Bradford because 2014 offered so much promise, certainly it offers more promise in 2015 because the issues are the same. He's coming off an ACL injury. The offensive line is better. They've got more weapons. They've got an entire other draft coming up front. And if, the front seven continues to develop, guys like Aaron Donald and Alec Ogletree, members of that front seven who are really still years away from their peak, the arguments against Sam Bradford were stronger last year than they are this year. So it's hard to predict. I mean, obviously there's going to be a groundswell of people who say, look, just on the optics alone, it's time to move away from Sam Bradford. We've given him plenty of time, and it hasn't worked out. The injuries being first and foremost among the reasons why. There's still, and part of it is, I would point to Fisher and Snead, a stubbornness that suggests that the natural skills that he displayed at Oklahoma early on as the offensive rookie of the year for the team are never going to go away. And as long as you build the rest of the team sufficiently, he could be capable in leading this team back to the playoffs, which is really the low bar that this franchise has right now. So I personally, I don't feel all that animated one way or the other. I think the bigger issue for the Rams, and certainly you look at it without Sam Bradford, is there are other issues that they can address right now, and certainly the coaching, the maturity, the readiness, the mental focus of this team that need to be addressed, whether or not Sam Bradford is the quarterback. But it's going to be a central issue in the offseason coming up, as it has for arguably the last 2 years. So it's going to be an interesting time, man. But I tell you what, Jess, it's great to have a quarterback like Sam Bradford that every year you can relive the same storyline. You go back to the same talking points over and over and over and ask the same questions, and you never get any answers. That's just it's a great situation to be in. It's just wonderful.
It's great for the internet world. You get
it's
clicks.
Great for the Cardinals. Don't lie. It's great for you guys.
I'll take it this way. It's having one team that's kind of stuck in the mud per se.
Yeah. It's great.
Oh yeah, especially when you have to deal with 49ers and Seattle, and their fans are so obnoxious. They are so obnoxious.
But that's what winning does. And that's what's weird about the Rams is we're able to beat the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers, whether or not we have Sam Bradford. That's the insanity of being a Rams fan, is you've got the talent to be able to go out and do that and do it on the road, and yet the things don't come together consistently enough to be able to look at this team week to week and be confident that they're going to be able to do it.
So let's look at last week. The pass rush has really kind of been an issue. This after number one in sacks in the league or something around there last year.
Just about.
They basically the sacks disappeared, whether it was at the change to Gregg Williams or what. But then the floodgates open. How much do you think that was the talent frying coming through on the scheming of the Rams, and how much of that is just more evidence of the 49ers, Colin Kaepernick, and their offensive line than their offensive issues overall, because they've really, really not looked good on offense this year?
Yeah, it was certainly some of the latter. The line looked really shaky, and I talked to Pooch after the game, David Pacillo, who I'm sure you guys know from Niners Nation. The 49ers line did not look good. They got really confused by some of the advanced moves, some of the stunts and the gap twists that we used. But even then, when you're going against the Rams, the talent level is high enough. You need to be on your game, and they just weren't. The issue for Rams fans, and one of the kind of checks on balance that I've offered, is Rams have run that, for 6-7 weeks now. And this was the first week where it really worked in spades. You guys remember from the 2012 season, what was it? It was Thursday night football,
yes,
right?
It was. That fateful Week 5 game.
Yeah. And, of course, that's one of the things the Rams fans like to lean on. But, look, it hasn't come consistently despite the talent. There have been, starts and stops with it, and that's usually enough to run a capable defense. But it hasn't been overwhelming the way it was when we faced you guys 2 years ago, and the way it was, obviously, last week. So I think it's a combination of poor line play and the fact that the Rams were due for a better showing. I think the big concern is everything before that and why they haven't been able to get off when you've got a pure pass rusher as talented as Robert Quinn, a rookie like Aaron Donald, and I'm sure you guys are going to talk about it tomorrow on Saturday if you haven't talked about it already. He's insanely capable of just shedding offensive linemen. It's really weird to see, I follow college football, And you see guys that are undersized in college football, but you know they're not going to make it in the NFL because, you know, they're 6'2", 260 playing defensive tackle. That's just not going to suffice. Aaron Donald's got a bit of that working against him. He's not a power defensive lineman. He's not great in the anchor run game. But what he's really good at is being incredibly quick and just dealing with an offensive lineman to the side and then having the entire backfield to scan and attack. It's weird to see an undersized guy be able to do that with such a plum and such consistency. They just haven't been able to take advantage of that, partly because of scheme, because they're dropping guys off, and partly because things just have been unlucky. That's what it is. But when you look at the San Francisco game, everything just kind of connected. It all clicked. And that's kind of what Rams fans were hoping for. Unfortunately, it's taken a couple weeks to get there.
So I'll be honest. When Aaron Donald's name came to the Rams, everyone I know was like, oh, man. Because there's something special about Donald, all the pre-draft stuff. Yes, he's undersized. Yes, this. But you had to know he was going to become a star because he not only had, now he's got the speed, he's got the strength. Yes, he's undersized, but he had the massive production. Yeah. One of the best producing players at his position. Then he had the huge Senior Bowl, so he did it against the best competition. He's got leadership capabilities. I can't imagine why. I understand why he wasn't drafted a little bit higher, but oh my goodness, when the Rams got him, Cardinals was like, are they just going to run all like 5-2 scheme? They'll go with just like 5 defensive, go 6, just all the defensive linemen just rush the quarterback and don't worry about anyone in the backfield because no one will be able to get the ball off. Or
and to a degree, that's been, I mean, they haven't run a lot of 5-man fronts, but the personnel has been so varied on the front because they got so many capable people to work in. Now, Donald's only got 21 tackles, but that's not really where his value comes. He's got 3 sacks. Really where his value comes from is getting in the backfield and disrupting plays. And obviously you don't get that from traditional stats. I'm sure that, you know, between Pro Football Focus and a lot of these advanced stats, you may get some other things. And he rates incredibly highly in those areas. But, you know, what I expect you guys will see is at least 2 plays where he's in the backfield and just blows up a play and somebody else gets a tackle, right? You guys run a simple inside handoff and he's there. That your running back breaks it outside and either the defensive end or linebacker gets credit for the tackle, but the play gets made by Aaron Donald, or a pass play or a play action where he immediately sheds his offensive lineman, is able to get in the pocket, and as soon as the quarterback turns around, he's there, either throws it away or just grounds the ball at the feet of the running back. It happens multiple times a game. He's really disruptive, and it's in ways that you don't expect because when you look at him, he's not a physical specimen. He's really not. He's listed at 6'1", 285, which isn't huge. He's not, you know, bulbous in the way, like if you watch college football, somebody like Robert Nkemdiche is at Ole Miss. He's not really stacked. He's not thick. He's just one of these guys that's big, but his attributes that you don't normally attribute to a guy that size, quickness, acceleration, hand velocity, all those things he's got. And I hate to use the word, so I'm not going to use elite. I won't say that. He's just got well above average, just well above average that contributes in ways that you don't expect defensive tackles to use to affect the game, but he does it so consistently. I mean, Rams fans couldn't be anything but ecstatic at the fact that, A, they've got him on the team, and B, he's been as good as he was after that.
And Cardinals fans understand the idea of disruption without the actual stats because that's kind of how their own line plays. We've got between Matt Shaughnessy, who's currently out as outside linebacker, one of the best edge setters in the game when it comes against the running game, and their scheme makes it so that their inside linebackers clean up and their secondary cleans up, and so they do a lot of disruption inside to force the offensive player out to the edge where there's someone waiting and great in their gap discipline. So we completely understand that. It's really exciting to see. I hope for, you know, it doesn't happen too often on Sunday, sure. But you know, if once or twice so we can see a flash, but you know, still make a play. I'll be okay with that. Let's tell me about the coaching situation. Now, obviously, at this point, you kind of brought it up. 3 years into the system, the Jeff Fisher's has a lot of capital behind his name, right. But you do look at the production over his last several years in Tennessee, combined with the first. You have what you have is a solid coach with talent that doesn't quite take over the top for whatever reason or another. how stable is the situation for Fisher these days?
Well, it's less stable, and I'd add to that he's got a history of starting really poorly, even in St. Louis, but obviously with his time in Tennessee. I think the problem is, year 3 is both a legitimate argument for the tenure of an incoming coach, but it's also symbolic. It's symbolic. You've got guys that are now approaching their peak from the first year that, and let's be honest about it, Les Snead is the general manager, but it's really Jeff Fisher who is at the head of this organization underneath the ownership class that is managing the franchise. The fact that, in really what I put on the coach, in terms of expectations, what I said was the Rams don't necessarily need to make the playoffs for this year to be a success. But when you get to week 15, 16, 17, and you see those playoff picture graphics, you know what I'm talking about, Jess.
Yes.
You go into the morning show, and they've got the graphic of who's in the playoffs, who's in the hunt, and those kind of things. The Rams needed to be on that graphic in the last couple weeks of the season. There's no reason that they shouldn't be. And I say shouldn't have been, I guess, now that we're taking this with a past, future kind of sense. There's no excuse for them not to be in that position at the end of the year, given everything that they've had to work with over the last couple of years in terms of draft pick, free agency, the fact that they have so much movement within the salary cap to go out and get guys like Jared Cook and Scott Wells and David Joseph and Jake Long. They've had the capability to, and Cortland Finnegan, who they brought in and cut for good reason. They've had a lot of room for flexibility on the roster to add free agents to the huge stable of draft picks that they have. There's just no reason that they shouldn't be able to at least contend for a playoff spot. So the fact that the start was so disappointing is, I think, what concerns a lot of Rams fans. Now, look, and I've said this a lot of times on Tertial Times, I don't expect the Revenge of the Birds readers or listeners, brought to you by Audible.com, by the way, one of the greatest organizations out there. One of the things you guys might not have picked up on, we're in the middle of a stretch that we've called the Octet of Pain. It's an 8-game stretch. 7 of the games are against playoff opponents, including an 8th game against you guys, the sole non-team that wasn't able to make the playoffs last year. So it's a brutal schedule stretch. Again, it's also 3-game road stretch that you guys are capping for us. So it's the difficult part of the schedule. It's one of the most difficult schedules in the NFL. When you look at the draft order, it makes things difficult because if the Rams tie with anybody in the final record, we're likely going to pick behind them in the draft because the stretch of schedule is so difficult. But what I think is also working for the general management and the coaching staff is that they've had time to prepare for this. When you look at you guys in Arizona, Philadelphia, Kansas City, those are teams that had a lot of the same issues 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and they've been able to put themselves in positive positions. You guys obviously jumping out to 7-1 more than anybody. There's no excuse for the Rams to say, hey, we needed more time. You can't say that when you're facing teams that had the same amount of time to get things right, and they've been able to do it, and you haven't. So it's going to be interesting to see how they finish the season. Things started out really poorly, 1-2 before they got to the bye weekend, that Octet of Pain. And now since we started 0-2 at Philadelphia versus San Francisco on Monday Night Football, but since then going 2-1, maybe they're turning the corner. I don't know. I think Sunday may be a good indication of whether or not this team has really learned something from the 2014 season, or if it's just youth that's still figuring things out and they're still really not that ready.
And if I look at the schedule, the Rams schedule's almost in a way opposite what the Cardinals have. If you have your,
you're welcome. And have a great time.
And that's what I have to say. Well, luckily with the Cardinals, they started out so hot, and they've only had one division game. You guys have already finished half your division schedule already, and with the 4th one in the way. And then you've got the AFC West coming up. You've got the Broncos. That's a tough game, but you get to play them at home.
That's being nice. Yeah, Rams against the Broncos. That's a little tough.
But then you've got a struggling Chargers team. You've got a terrible Raiders team. You've got, at best an underperforming Redskins team. Sure. And then you still got so there is definitely time to get back in it, whether it is going to be able to be enough to pull back in to completely save the division. But because you've got those 2 division wins off the bat already, that puts him in a good position at least. And so I can't say that they're completely out of it, because who knows how things are going to play out. you're probably looking at right now probably a 2-team playoff race as of right now for. I don't think at this point we can say that 3 teams out of the NFC West are going to make the playoffs this year. So it's going to be the top 2 because the NFC East looks good, at least record-wise, to do that as well. So it's going to be, and you might have the NFC North come into play as well. So I mean, it could be that at 3-5, you could pull back up to 8-8, 9-7, and be in the mix, and at least in the right direction. Which would definitely be on the positive side. Gregg Williams, what has he done differently with the defense that wasn't being done before? Does it look much different, or when Jeff Fisher brought in his guy last year, was it knowing that Williams was going to come in, and so it was meant to have a guy who was similar in philosophy?
That's a hell of a segue, my dog. I love that. I think what's interesting is that the Rams were able to build that kind of reputation, I guess, largely built on the front four. But overall, teams didn't want to look at the Rams in 2014 and think that was going to be an easy game to be able to pick up. And yet things haven't worked out. I think what's interesting about Gregg Williams is he's bringing some entirely new looks, really heavy blitz packages. He has what is called a Ruby package, which is a 3-man front. And I know you guys used a bit of a 4-man front, interestingly. So the timing may be more than coincidental that as you guys are experimenting with that, the Rams have played around with this 3-man front earlier in the year, where it allows the blitz to come. It's not a 3-man front and dropping 8 guys in the package into coverage. It's a 3-man front and then allowing the blitz to come from unpredictable angles. And I think, there's a bit of a learning curve again. You've got a first-year defensive coordinator with a defense that's that young. They're trying to figure out how they want to implement these things. They've had some injuries, especially in the secondary. Janoris Jenkins has been missing for a couple weeks. Brandon McGee, the cornerback, has been missing for quite a while. Trumaine Johnson got hurt in the preseason and really just made his season debut last week as he continues to get back in the mix. So they're trying to deal with some things, and all of this is without defensive end Chris Long, who's been one of the mainstays of the defense for the last half-decade. You can't put a lot of the defensive struggles on Gregg Williams. Obviously, he's got to take responsibility for it. But there are reasons to look at it and think that things could have been different. I think the problem is there are so many other factors, and you look at the personnel and the fact that there's so much youth. The safeties haven't been great. We just traded for Mark Barron, which somehow became a huge headline before it got swept under the rug because he doesn't really fit the Rams that well. It's a really weird trade. He played 7 snaps on special teams last week, didn't even play on defense, which arguably makes him the most Rams move of the last decade. We'll have to see, man. There's a lot of things at work. I don't think they have the answer coming this Sunday. It's one of those things that's going to play out over, week to week and even beyond the season. But I don't think there's any reason to think that Gregg Williams and his defense are going anywhere. It's just a matter of figuring out really where they're going.
All right, let's look forward.
If that makes sense. Is that too esoteric to say they don't? I don't know. I get a little cold.
Well, and that's fine. I mean, if it's you can't define it, well, we can't expect to get more definition than someone who follows and covers the team on a daily basis. So
you have no idea, Jess. I dare you to try to explain the Rams week to week, man.
And luckily, I guess, does it kind of take on the personality of the community there? A very respect, at least within the sports community, a very respected community that just quietly has expectations that doesn't go over the top with anything. Knowing about the baseball side of things,
sure.
a very well respected, classy type of fan base, but they never tend to get too excited. I mean, they definitely get excited, but they don't tend to kill their team when they're having down times. Is that fair to say?
It may be, but here's what I would counter that with. That may make sense for football. That may fit the attitude of football, that may fit the attitude of baseball. That doesn't fit the attitude of football. You can't have politeness in football. There's no crying in football. You can't, to borrow the term. Here's the thing. In St. Louis, let's be honest. I'm not from St. Louis. I grew up in Texas. St. Louis, let's be honest, is a baseball town that doesn't have a great history of football. And obviously, you guys.
No, I know.
Yeah,
We got the cast-off team that was terrible from the until.
I think that's great. I think that makes things interesting. If you talk to the 60-year-old, 70-year-old fans, they have a very unique view of what football means to St. Louis, of what the Cardinals as a franchise mean, of what the Rams mean as a franchise,
and how much the Bidwills are disliked.
Sure, absolutely. I think what's interesting is, as you mentioned, this kind of politeness, and that plays in, I took over Tertial Times from Ryan Van Bibber earlier this year. A lot of people should probably recognize that name. He's the NFL editor for SB Nation at the headquarters level. We love Van. He's on to bigger and better things. But I think what's great about Tertial Times that he analyzed, a great term that he came up with was the bigotry of soft expectations. And that's really what the Rams as a franchise are dealing with, certainly since the greatest show on turf, is this idea of we had the worst 5-year stretch of any team in the history of NFL, and we didn't call for everybody to get fired. We were just kind of like, you can get better and good luck. You had the worst 5-year stretch of everybody. You should have been calling on janitors, on the gatekeeper, on everybody to get completely wiped out of that organization. But there's this feeling of mediocrity as being sufficient. And even as I'm guilty of it too. I mentioned it earlier that I said that just being in the playoff picture is sufficient. It's because we've gotten so inured and so desensitized to what the normal demands of a fan base should be, that just making or getting close to the playoffs is enough, and not actually, competing, enabled to be in the competition for a Super Bowl, enabled to be in competition for a longer playoff run. I think it's something that Rams fans have difficulty dealing with because we were so bad and so incapable that averageness as a goal seems feasible. And it's one of those things that we're working through. And honestly, I would like your guys' support. Maybe a get well card, a feel better soon kind of sentiment. We're just not capable of this idea of demanding greatness, of demanding something beyond averageness, because it's been so long since we got there. We haven't had a winning record in a decade, Jess. It's hard to come out and say, you've got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, when anything that nobody even asked for is something we haven't had.
And that's true. And Cardinals fans suffered through that for forever. Since coming to Arizona, there was an early 8-8 year back in the early 90s.
I would kill for 8-8 right now. We haven't had 8. We haven't had 8-8 since you were single, Jess.
I'm thinking like there was an 8-8 year in the early 90s. Then there was the 9-7 playoff year in 98. Then nothing. Then it went 8-8 in 07, 9-7 in 08, 10-6 in 09. Then you went 7 years out of 20, almost 30. That we're going up on almost 26 years. So 7 years out of 25, 26 years now. It was a non-losing season, and only 4 winning seasons in 26 years, and we're on our way to that 5th one. But yeah, we understand. We've done things like Buddy Ryan. We did it.
Hey, you got Buddy Ryan. We have Steve Spagnuolo. So
yes,
come on. and that's where we're at. Look, the Rams, they haven't had a winning season since 2003, 2 8-8 seasons since then, but they haven't even gotten to 8-8 since 2006. You had a run where 2007, 2008, 2009, they totaled 6 wins. Over 3 seasons, they totaled 6 wins. It was just so abjectly horrible that it reconditioned the entire fan base to a new level of incapability that it's hard to come out and say, yeah, we deserve better because we've dealt with so much worse. We're already at 3 wins, and that's better than we've done.
3 wins! Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's look at the game coming up. What are some of the matchups that Rams fans will be watching and that Cardinals fans should be in particular keeping an eye out for?
Well, obviously you talk about the defensive line and going against you guys. I think that's always going to be a strength that St. Louis Rams fans are going to lean on. Obviously, I don't know what's going on week to week with you guys, but as I look at, the personnel, when you got Beldier, I'm assuming Beldier's still left tackle.
Yes.
Center line at center. The right side with Bobby Massey, somebody that Rams fans have taken advantage of in the past. That's going to be an opportunity that I think we're going to expect to win. I think that obviously the key is going to be the passing game when you've got, Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Floyd. Those are talents, and talents is something that the Rams fans have really struggled with. They've given up free coverage runs, and this is one of those things that go back to being a young team, maybe poorly coached. They've had miscommunication errors where guys like Des Bryant, Jeremy Maclin, Anquan Bolden are able to run free for touchdowns in the defense. Those guys are good enough where you can't allow miscommunication to allow them to be uncovered, because you know that they're going to have plenty of field in front of them, and every single one has resulted in a touchdown. With Fitzgerald and Floyd, you certainly can't allow that. The other thing, and even though the stats don't suggest it, because the Rams have been decent against passing yardage, and they've had struggles with the run yardage, is it suggests the opposite. Rams have done a decent job against the run. They were the one team until last week with you guys to hold DeMarco Murray to his worst performance of the year. So when I look at the running game and Andre Ellington, Robert Hughes, I'm interested to see how that group does against a Rams defense that has had to key down on the pass defense because of the errors and the lack of personnel available for injuries. On the defensive side for you guys, the Rams offense has looked really, really, really bad the last couple of weeks. So I don't know how it's going to work. You guys have plenty of talent in the secondary. I really don't want Austin Davis to test people. And until last week, that's something he hadn't done. But it felt like against the 49ers, either he was trying to make a play or he almost not necessarily forgot, but he looked at a window and maybe felt that his arm strength was enough to make a play, and it's just not. He doesn't have great arm strength. He's not able to anchor a big passing game when you look at downfield opportunities. And, when you guys have Patrick Peterson, Teron Matthew, Antonio Cromartie, that's not going to work anyway. So I think the Rams just have to be careful on offense and engineer some opportunities to get some special teams points, to get some field goals. If you look back last week, that was really the determining factor in the game. Andy Lee, one of the best punters in the league, as we all know, for the 49ers, shanked the punt. It gave the Rams field position to be able to kick the field goal, and the defense in the end was able to get the win on a controversial play. I think that's kind of where the Rams need the ball to bounce, is to get some points out of special teams, minimize what's needed out of the passing game, and keep you guys limited on offense. Otherwise, it's going to get kind of ugly.
What would be the over-under on trick plays, fakes, etc. that the Cardinals can see from the Rams?
I'll give an over-under. There's an over-under to suggest it's going to be really low, and an over-under to suggest it's going to be really high. So I'll put the over-under at 3. Because what you'll see from the game plan for the Rams is either they come out and run something really scripted, really simple, kind of boring, but effective, and then a game where the effective stuff just doesn't work. And screw it, let's run an end around to our tight end, because that's what people do. Brian Schottenheimer has no shame in doing the stupidest thing you've ever seen, because nobody expects it, right? That's what happens when you've got a lead against the 49ers. There's 2 minutes remaining. It's 3rd and 1. Your offensive line has been winning the battle. Let's call a pass play. Why? Because nobody expects it. And what happens? It doesn't work.
He outsmarted himself.
Yeah, it really is. And that's been one of the problems for the Rams over the last few years. It's certainly been a problem this year. And that's where it comes into those pass play, the special play issues, is you never know when it's going to come in spades, because this team does the things you say, okay, there's 0% chance they do this, and they end up doing that sometimes because that's what works. Now, the Seattle game was a little bit more famous because they had this weird punt return play.
That was fantastic.
It was fun, man. And it was fun because nobody does that, and it took so much preparation to know that Seattle likes to punt to one side. So if you fake it, everybody bites on it. The end of the game play where you fake the punt was more about the fact that the Rams couldn't stop the Seahawks offense at the end of the game. So, if you're going to lose by them kicking a field goal, you might as well try the fake punt and have them kick it anyway. But in terms of some of the other weirdness and some of the trick plays, they work them in at times you don't expect. End arounds to Jared Cook, Kenny Britt are never going to be successful plays, but they kind of do them just to force you to say, holy crap, this team will do anything no matter how stupid it is. We have to be prepared for everything, and maybe to a degree that works. I don't know, man. It's the 2014 Rams. I can't promise you anything that you won't see. Yeah, I would say this. To this point, we're so entertaining that part of it is just being along for the ride. And when you're the Seattle Seahawks and San Francisco 49ers teams that we actively root against, when you get wins against them, it's great. It's kind of an issue of dealing with the other games on the schedule that hasn't looked up.
So let's put you to the fire right here. I know
you've had me for 50 minutes talking about the 2014 Rams. I've been on the fire.
So the line's about a touchdown, 7.5, I think is what the current line is. Is there any scenario in which you see the Rams pulling off the upset on the road against a 7-1 Cardinals team? And if so, tell us how that goes.
Yes, because of they're too unpredictable. I could see them winning by 2 touchdowns because remember, this is a Rams team that was up 21-0 against the Cowboys. They were down by 4+ touchdowns against the Eagles and had the ball to be able to win the game. This is a team that's got too much talent to know what to do with it. So when you ask, can they overcome that line? Absolutely. They just won in San Francisco on the road. The problem is they also lost to San Francisco with a 14-point lead at home on Monday Night Football. They've got so many issues that don't have to do with talent and the team makeup. So when you ask, can they do it? Of course they can. Do I trust them to? Absolutely not. But it's a matter of figuring out those moments when they can take advantage of little idiosyncrasies that they find in y'all's defense that they can take advantage of. Early game planning was something you talked about early on in the podcast, that they've got things scripted that are going to be able to be successful. But it's a team that over 60 minutes you feel less comfortable with than if you did being able to play a 15-minute football.
Can I get a prediction out of you?
It's your podcast, man. I've got a prediction in for our staff predictions running tomorrow on Turf Show time. I've got the Rams winning. I had them losing at San Francisco. I had them getting blown out at Kansas City as they did. I had them beating Seattle. So I've got a decent track record. But here's the thing. My prediction almost week to week goes on the thing I think is less likely to happen. Whatever I think is the least likely thing to happen is what I put on the staff predictions. So I put a Rams win because if you look at the numbers, if you look at the way the teams are playing, if you look at the makeup, if you look at the momentum, there's no reason to think there's a reason the line is 7.5 points, and I think plus is the money that started coming in. There's no reason to look at the Rams and think, yeah, this is a team that can go to Arizona 7-1 the way you guys have been playing and get a win. But that's what the Rams have been doing all season. They've been doing the things that don't make sense. So if I get a prediction, screw it. I'll take Rams by 20. Nothing makes sense anymore.
All right. So I don't think, if the Cardinals, the one thing I know the Cardinals they're not going to overlook the Rams.
You get to know things about your team. That's incredibly comfortable.
That's the one thing about this team we know they don't overlook anyone. And
here's what I'll tell you, Jess. I promise. On offense, we're going to play 11 guys at a time, and on defense, we're going to play at least 10. We might play 11. But I'm not counting out 10.
Do you think will they try 12? Will they try 12?
Well, we've done it in the past. We've tried it. If the Rams come out with 10 guys on defense, you guys will be so confused. It'll end up in a pick six or some crazy shit that I don't even know.
Well, the Cardinals did that. They blocked a field goal with 10 men on the field. And they blocked a field goal with 10 men on the field. And I think, I was looking at the game tape, there was a play early on. I don't know if they got off the field, but it looked like they had 12 men on the field and never got called for it. So something like that. Cool. 3K, I appreciate the time on the show. Listeners, please visit turfshowtimes.com. Many of you are already members over there and participate in some of the conversations. And compared to the conversations on Niners Nation and Field Goals, it's a much more civil conversation. It's a much more civil conversation, and as it's a much more polite conversation. I'm sure
I want that audio clip, man. I want that audio clip.
Because I have great respect for Danny Kelly, for Fooch. They're great. I cannot stand the fan base of either of those franchises.
Well, let's share in our content, and I appreciate y'all's gratitude for being able to beat both of those guys in week 7 and week 9. I will say this: remember that while we're playing our first game now, we face each other December 11th, and if the Rams are able to resurrect the season, and you guys continue anywhere close to the trajectory you guys have been on, I doubt it's going to be all that friendly mid-December when we face each other again. But if anything, for the Revenge of the Birds crew, for the Tertial Times crew, Jess and I are on great terms. We can all be people. Can't we all get along?
Yeah, I think we can. Thank you very much, 3K. This has been Revenge of the Birds of Radio. Again, visit Turf Show Dimes. 3K, is how can they follow you on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle out there?
Easiest way is to follow audible.com. You'll be able to get all the news. Other than that, follow 3K underscore at Twitter, whatever, man. Y'all know where to find me. Tertial Times. Y'all figure it out.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That'll close our preview show. We will be back next week with Seth Coxon and myself. We will be reviewing the show next week, reviewing the game against the Rams. Hopefully, it will be their 8th win of the season, and hopefully, hopefully. I didn't guarantee a win, but a hopeful win. And next week, hopefully, we will also get a guest from Pride of Detroit from SB Nation, so we can preview the game next week at home against the Lions. Revenge of the Birds Radio listeners, thank you for downloading the show. We will talk to you again next week.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/Revenge of the Birds.